How's everybody doing? Good. It is so hard to interrupt lunch conversation because there is so much energy and just power in this room. So we hope that this will be more of a conversation over lunch that will add to the already dynamic stuff that's been happening, the dynamic learning that's been happening, the dynamic collaborations that are forming as we speak. So for those of you that I have not had the opportunity to give a hug to, my name is Jalon White Newsome. I'm with the Kresge team, sit on the environment program, and just blessed and grateful to be in the presence of some awesome leaders today. We have a powerful panel. Unlike any of the other panels that we've had, and again, we're going to try not to be too disruptive to your meal, but I hope that as a part of stuff in your face that you're able to have some conversations as well about the thing that we're going to talk about today, which is planning for climate and not planning like we're in the past. So back in 2009, with the help of about 29 senior citizens in the city of Detroit, we had the opportunity to collect over 47,000 points of data. And these data points were, one, the temperatures in their home from July 1st to the end of August, and also the temperatures right outside of their home to understand what the urban heat island effect was doing to their health. And so we collected these data points, but we didn't stop there. We shared this data with our local health department, when we had a health department in Detroit. And we also worked with Meals on Wheels. We worked with the Detroit Area Agency on Aging to make sure that this data was used for good. We also had an opportunity, and one of the best parts, I enjoyed going to several of the senior centers and talking about heat stress and heat illness and how you should only cook during certain times of the day. How you should make sure that when your windows are up for cooling, that you can put a fan in the window to pull the hot air out. So we talked about practical ways to keep yourself healthy when the heat was coming in. And so this was just one example of how I feel data can be used for good, especially as we talk about reducing the threat of climate change on the communities we care about. In my case, it was the seniors in the city of Detroit. A couple of those seniors were my grandparents. But we also know data can be used for not good things, or it can't be used at all. So 20 years ago, I worked as a chemical engineer in Fort Worth, Texas. And it gets hot in Fort Worth. And we manufactured some nasty chemicals, and we had a lot of data. We had temperature data, pressure data. We had data about the emissions that came out of our stacks. Because we were in a low-income community, mostly Latino brothers and sisters lived around this plant. But what I couldn't get past was that we never really used the data for any good. We never really communicated with the community the dangers of these emissions. That in fact, on those over 100-degree days in Texas, that this anhydrous ammonia tank would do multiple releases and send plumes throughout the community, and what they needed to look for to be aware and know to stay inside when those types of things happen. So we did not use data for good. So I bring up those two examples because as we talk about planning for the future, actually somebody said climate change is happening now, so how do we plan now a little bit smarter? Data, whether it's the hard quantitative data or the qualitative data, the data of stories that we have to share, it is essential to making sure that we protect the most precious folks in our communities. So with that, I want to introduce our wonderful panel. And what's cool about it, they all come at this data question from different perspectives. And so what we want you to do while you're eating and stuffing your face, there's some tablets and pens in the middle of the table. And I want you to talk amongst your new friends and think about a couple of questions. You only have 5 minutes, so don't write a dissertation, but just think about it. A couple of questions we want you to think about. What data is missing from your work now? Repeat that for me. What's the first question?
What data is missing from your work now?
Awesome. The second question. What are the challenges with the data that you have that you currently face? So what's that second question?
What are the challenges with the data you have now?
I don't think they heard that.
What was the question I asked, Cecil?
What challenges do you have with the data that you currently have now? Can we hear a response, please? We in church.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Cecil. I said Cecil, I know. The last question, do you find biased sources of data in your work? Okay?
Is that an actual question?
Well, I'm asking it. Okay, so you have 5 minutes at your table. You can talk amongst each other, make some notes, and we're going to hear from about 3 or 4 different tables. So have some brave souls, okay? So thank you. So we have MC Cecil on the mic over there. We got DJ Richard Moss on the mic over there. Been holding it down up here. So let's hear some answers to these questions. Raise your hand. We're going to take 3 tables. Or don't let me call you out. All right, a hand. Dr. Holder.
Well, our table had a great discussion on the whole concept of surveys, where we're looking at more qualitative data. That means we have to go in and have a dialogue with our community. Not so much collecting a lot of quantitative stuff and then we report back and the survey shows 900 people said. So our goal really is to have that discussion with the community and asking primarily open-ended questions. What does climate change look like to you? What do you do when it gets hot? What would you want us to do? How do you cool off? Some simple questions that opens the communication, the conversation. And looking at the community assets and the assessment that we do in community in a micro level and reframing it. So that corner store doesn't become, it's not a liquor store, which is what the vast majority of the outsiders would see, where the community sees it as a really important resource to get things that they need at whatever time they need it. So that becomes a community asset rather than a huge negative. So it's having the community define its assets, define what it wants to do, define what we want to research, and then have solutions that involves the community.
Thank you, Dr. Holder. All right, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Brian Roberson from American Central Hospital. So we had a good discussion about a couple of things. I'll touch on one of them, and that's data at the appropriate level. And that's, a lot of times data gets squishy when you try to merge state level data with county level data, with city level data, with street intersection level data. And that's a real problem that has some good solutions and some not good solutions. But it is a major problem.
Thank you. How many of y'all believe data gets messy? Yes, thank you, Brian. Let's give him some love. All right, last one. Say your name and where you're from again.
My name is Samir Rotterdam. I'm with Franklin Center. And for the first ones, we have a beautiful Washington Health Disparities map, but it does still need dangerous heat days. It needs data on tree cover. More broadly, we would like data to be disaggregated by race and income. And the things that we need are, we need assets, community assets overlaid with social vulnerabilities, with climate change impacts. And yes, there's definitely bias in the data.
Thank you so much. Let's give him a hand. Appreciate you. So what's beautiful about this gathering is that for the researchers in the room, do you hear these data gaps and needs? So again, we should figure out how do we actually act on that and not just talk about it. So thank you. So we're going to jump right into our panel. We're going to start with Dr. Beth Sawin, who is with an organization called Climate Interactive. I am not even going to pretend to know everything she does, but she does a lot of systems modeling and simulation around climate, connected with health, equity, energy, and a whole bunch of stuff. So Beth, please kick us off with how you use data, some challenges, barriers, opportunities. Just share with us your wisdom.
Great, thanks for that. Is this on?
Can you want her?
How's that? Better? All right. Thank you, Jalon. I'm actually going to start with with some of the ideas from yesterday for those of you who were at the session with Bernice and Felicia, where we learned about the power of stories. We learned that if you change the stories, then you can change the world. That's one thing that I walked away with. And we learned that when powerful interests tell stories, they leave things out. And I was thinking about that in terms of data, and I think it's kind of the same thing. And I would argue that when it comes to the nexus that we're talking about here of climate, health, and equity, right now we have a really fragmented story when it comes to data. And in fact, we have at least 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different stories. And none of them have the same characters. So the climate story has CO2 and long-term impacts, and health story has PM 2.5 and premature births and respiratory illnesses, right? And on. We learned that if we can learn how to tell one story, we have the power to move politics and implementation and power. And I think we should think about our data that way too. That if we can figure out how to take these fragmented data streams and turn them into one thing, I think we're going to change the worldview that you all are working on. And I want to give just a couple examples, not from our own research, but from data that I think is really important. And this first bit is a little interactive. So draw a circle on your piece of paper. You're going to make a pie chart. Okay? So this is what it needs to look like. The first part, the biggest piece of pie, is a little more than a half a piece. It's 54%. Then there's another part that's 22%, another part that's 18%, and then what's left is 6%. All right, so that'll challenge your drawing skills. So this is actually the cost of 1 year worth of burning coal in the United States. And I would tell you the easy part, 6% is other, so it's a bunch of little things. Mercury's in there. The other 3 are the health costs of air pollution, the climate impacts, and the effects on public health where coal is extracted. So I want you to label your pie charts.
So what's in between 54, 22, 6, and there's a number missing?
18. All right. So which one is the health effects of air pollution? What percent?
54.
54. Which one is the public health effects where coal is mined? 22. So 18%, that's the long-term climate impacts. The field I come out of, the climate and energy field, that's all we focus on is that piece of pie, right? And you can think about how thrilled the fossil fuel industry must be that we're focused on 18% of the whole piece of pie. So what I see the power of is to talk about the whole pie in one internally consistent conversation when it comes to data. I'm going to give you one more pie chart. This one's easier, it only has 2 parts. 64% and 36%. All right. This is the benefit since 2007 of all the new solar and wind that's been built in the United States. It has savings for people's health because we're off of fossil fuel in some places, and it has savings for climate impacts. Which one's 64%? Which one is 36%? You should know it from the cold one, right? 64% is health. All right, we let all this conversation about clean energy be framed as a climate and energy conversation, but its biggest benefit has been shown to be health. And we don't have to choose one or the other, but one internally consistent picture, I think, could change the discourse. So I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap it up by saying that at Climate Interactive, we've been trying to figure out how to help people tell this internally consistent story. We have some case studies that are in the materials Kresge has collected for you, so check that out. And I'll just leave with one of those case studies, which is a program in the UK that helped kids find safe ways to walk to school. So they figured out what the obstacles were, and they made it safer. They found out that there was a 33% decrease in cars used for school trips, and there was 26% more children walking to school. And then they measured all of the benefits that came out of that. Okay, so they're making one internally consistent set of data. They measured less congestion, less air quality, more physical activity, more social interaction for those kids, and fuel savings for the families. And when they added that all up, they measured how much they spent and how much those benefits were worth. And what was the multiplier? Bigger than 1, less than 1? Bigger, a lot bigger? It was 6, all right? And it's not always that big, sometimes it's break even, but rarely is it less. So why have we let this be a conversation about sacrifice and giving things up in order to protect the climate? When the data, if you can put it all on one page, rarely supports that story.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. My name again is Richard Moss, and I'm kind of the executive director of an aspiring organization called the Science for Climate Action Network, which I'll explain a little bit what we're trying to do. But I just want to start by acknowledging that I'm here to learn. It was mentioned this morning that there's really a need for kind of a better two-way conversation among people who are in the trenches on the front lines doing this work, and people who aspire to try to help in some way with information that we feel we have that may be useful. We don't need climate science to tell us that the weather and environmental conditions are already having really horrible impacts on communities. High heat, flooding, air quality, all the problems that we've been talking about all day. But unfortunately, a lot of those things are going to get worse, and maybe a lot worse as time goes on. And so the challenge that some of us are trying to get at is to better understand how information about those future hazards could be useful today as you're planning resilience strategies. And the idea is really not to divert you from what we're doing, but to try to think about how to integrate that information so that as you set a strategy, design an intervention, you know it's going to work for a couple of decades going forward. It's not going to be vulnerable in some sense. So traditional science, I think, is what we see a lot, and we refer to it sort of as the loading dock approach, where academics will go off and do a study and they deliver it to people and they try to communicate it to them and tell them something that they hope is going to be relevant to them. And I think that what we've seen a lot is an evolution away from that, and it's one of the things that gives me hope. I call it community science, or some people call it co-production of science. And what I mean by that is that the community who is working together, and it could be defined geographically, it could be defined as an interest group or in some other way, is working with relevant technical experts, and they start from defining the problem and framing the problem that is going to advance community priorities, and then trying to work on collecting relevant data and analyzing it together so that it helps inform selection of options that would be resilient to the future. And it does a couple of interesting things when you see it done well. First, it changes the focus. So right now we have something called the National Climate Assessment, which produces great information. It's mandated by Congress. Federal agencies produce it. And some of you have seen it. It's a report that was brought out the day after Thanksgiving by the Trump administration in the hope that nobody would notice it. Right? And it provides really valuable information on vulnerability in different regions or sectors like water resources. This new framing all of a sudden points towards things like solutions for flooding or for managing heat waves, and helps to package the science in a way that is now in a more integrated, accessible way to give people help in solving problems. The second thing that it really does, I think, is change the nature of what we need from communities and practitioners who are involved in this. It's not just defining problems, but it's your experience in how to solve those problems that also has to be treated as part of the respective knowledge base. And that's a really, really important change. And then the third thing that comes out of it, I think, is just a much wider set of ideas about how to communicate with people and communicate in an integrated way that's associated with problem solving. So it's toolkits and things like that. People will say we've got plenty of toolkits, so we're not thinking about more toolkits, but we're trying to think about things that you should look for in a toolkit to actually be both effective and scientifically robust. So it's kind of like guides to that sort of stuff. And so, I think it could help, and it's been shown to help, but also shown to get off track in some ways. I think there is a dominance of traditional science as it's formed. I think there's oftentimes a failure to support the community participants. We expect them just to show up without any help for showing up, without any kind of compensation or recognition that they're taking time away from a job or from childcare or things like that. And there's also a real danger that academics expropriate the ideas that they get in these sessions and just kind of reflect them in the peer-reviewed literature, go off and do their studies, and that's another thing that I think we really have to work towards eliminating. So the Science for Climate Action Network, the idea for this, as many of the good ideas in this area, was born during the Obama administration. They established a federal advisory committee that I was privileged to chair. And the idea was to present ideas to the federal government on how to move away from this more kind of delivery-driven, loading dock-driven approach to this more community-oriented science. Of course, the predictable thing happened. In 2017, the Trump administration discontinued it, and a group of us decided we would continue to try to put together the recommendations. I was at Columbia for a year working on that, acknowledged their support, and now at Princeton. And we've come out with recommendations, and we're trying to set up this new organization to do that, and are really interested in forming it at the service of the network members to be a source of collaborative learning around this approach focused on real problems that people have confronted. So, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've already learned a lot, and look forward to continuing.
I want to thank Jalan, and I want to thank Kresge for pulling us all together, and I want to thank my panelists for sharing their insights as well. Jalan opened us up by really talking about the framing of this particular challenge of how do we sort of plan for the future in more effective ways? How do we plan for now in reality in more effective ways? Our answer to that in many communities across this country has been the answer of engage us in the planning process, engage us in the science process. And so I'm going to run through a couple of things quite quickly to try to share with you some of what we at REACT have learned, some of what we hope to share, and some of what we want to learn from you all in the process moving forward. Planning for and developing community-driven policy solutions or transforming our communities for the climate crisis is serious business. Making progress on these fronts often requires helping diverse community stakeholders build the collective muscle, and yes, I do mean muscle, but one that's mental, to overcome the paralysis that government and science have fostered. It calls us to help community members recognize their shared challenges, work through differing perspectives and interests. The seriousness of such issues should not be undervalued or disregarded. However, we should not disregard or undervalue the power of playfulness in helping communities really recognize that they can make progress on the climate crisis as well. Indeed, the more serious the concern, the more the need for playfulness, to help people see beyond the things that really worry them and the fears that have been gendered up. I remember yesterday. Okay, so I can't sing that well. But I want to say thank you to the Center for Story-Based Strategy, because I'm lifting up something that I heard them say yesterday, right? They talked about imagination, we're talking about playfulness, and the two of them combined can clearly be powerful. Recognizing the power of play, my colleagues at WEAC and I have employed a certain type of serious game, a role-play simulation to help to help advance collaborative problem solving around the complex environmental and public policy issue that the climate represents. The role-play simulations that we use are face-to-face, mock group decision-making exercises. Simulation participants, people who are participating in, are assigned individual roles, and they have to work together as a community to solve particular challenges that they're presented with in the context of a fabricated but realistic scenario. We were supported in that endeavor by the brilliance and commitment to social and climate justice of Dr. Michael McDonald, to who we turn to help train our communities in the skills of mutual gains, negotiation, facilitation, mediation, and collaborative problem solving. Through this smart gaming approach, our staff and members of WEAC forged the Northern Manhattan Climate Action Plan, the NMCA, with the backing and support of the Kresge Foundation. So I'm going to sing again. I want to thank you, Shamar, Lois, David, and Rick, You're placing your faith in us. So what was the smart in smart games, you might ask? No, it wasn't the application of 6G technology or AI. If you don't know what they are, look it up. Google. It was about meeting people where they were. Yes, we infused into the serious game process climate science data, often connecting that data to public health. We used pictures and other graphic imagery to show how the climate science data linked to health outcomes like heat stroke. We talked about how the human body has medically significant fever at 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just shy of 2 degrees Fahrenheit of the average normal human body temperature, to help them put into context the issue of the language of danger around 2 degrees Celsius, which allows many of our members and our residents in Northern Manhattan to better connect to the data they are being fed. A key takeaway is that, in summary, one of the things that role-play simulations can help us produce is that they can increase community concern and support for collective action. 400 residents in Northern Manhattan participated in our serious games process. And in the simulations, they increased their awareness and concern about climate change risk. It also increased people's support for and confidence in the prospects of community adaptation and action. We built civic musculature for community collaborative capacity. Participation in the simulations helped participants appreciate the interdependency that they live with every single day in their community, and the need for collective adaptation action. Increased empathy for different community members' perspectives, and generated support for collaborative adaptation decision-making. We fostered a sense of social learning. The games brought diverse stakeholders and community members together to learn with and from each other, and we catalyzed action. While the long-term effects of the NMCA remain to be seen, all of the communities that we have worked with have taken meaningful steps towards forwarding that plan, and we're really thankful for that. We know that this kind of engagement is valuable in encouraging collective action to address environmental justice and public health and climate policy concerns. In the last few minutes that I probably don't have, I want to lift up another approach that we have deployed to engage our members in planning for climate resiliency and health using climate science data, and that is citizen science and community-based participatory research. In our Harlem Heat Initiative, we partnered with CUNY School of Journalism, researchers at City College and IC Change. Ask me why the School of Journalism in the question phase, if you will, to monitor levels of indoor heat and humidity. We engaged REACT members in the process of developing the research design, helping build the actual monitoring tools themselves, collecting the data, and then reporting it to their communities about heat and humidity in their apartments. I want to also point out that we've done another community-based research project, and that's our Cooling Center survey. And I want to thank my colleague Sonal Jessel, Sonal, stand up, and our interns Jennifer Yuala and Catherine Mizoshi from the School of Visual Arts. Catherine and Jennifer, stand up. This approach is not just reactive. It is approached by others in the broader field of the environmental justice movement. Harambe House in Savannah, Georgia has done this. Harambe House, stand up. GAVA and Poder in Austin, Texas has done this. GAVA and Poder, stand up. Environmental Health Coalition in San Diego, California has done this. EHC, stand up. All of these are members. Tejas in Houston, Texas, has done this. All of these are members of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum. I want to thank Jalan for her work in helping support that before she came to Prezi. Yes, she had a life before Prezi. And Uprose in Sunset Park, who's here today, they have done so as well. I want to make sure that they get a shout out and recognition as well. Uprose, you should stand up. Although multiple definitions abound for citizen science, it is at its core public participation in research and scientific actions. According to Karen Cooper in her book, Citizen Science, How Ordinary People Are Changing the Face of Discovery, while citizen as scientists is an old tradition dating back centuries, new technological and societal developments are reshaping the phenomenon for current and future generations. Now, if I were Karen Cook, I would name the book not just how we're changing the face of discovery, but how we're building a better science mousetrap, for sure. Because that is what we are doing when citizens volunteer as data collectors in science projects. That is what we are doing when they collaborate with scientific experts, like some of these on this panel here, on research design, and as exemplified by the participants in the examples that I have called out to you here today. The last form of citizen science, community citizen science, tends to be action-oriented, highly collaborative, or independently led by citizen volunteers with research conducted to support interventional activities or policy change. Community citizen science can and must be a way forward to breaking this broken pipeline. It can and must be the way that we fashion solutions for the now and for our future. It can and has been demonstrated to be successful. Thank you.
So, Dr. Beth, you said even though our climate stories have different characters, we need to learn how to begin to tell one story. Dr. Richard, you said we need to get away from the loading dock approach. And Cecil, you talked about imagination and playfulness and how powerful that can be. Gosh, did anybody learn anything today? Okay, I feel like Black History Month is the shortest and we have the shortest amount of time to talk, but that's all right. We got 2 more minutes, so I don't know if we have time for questions or reactions, but let's use those 2 minutes. Any thoughts or questions, reactions? Yes, ma'am, go for it. Gaba.
Thank you.
First, thank you for the warm shout out, Cecil, and for all of you for your work. I guess my reaction is just, this is helpful to hear because I think sometimes it's overwhelming to think about, are we getting enough data if we do this work? Are we visiting enough households? Did we get that block and this block? But when I hear personally what y'all are talking about, it doesn't matter because you just did the thing. And to have that data to say, these are directly impacted people's stories, this is their data, this is what you were able to do with it. It kind of gives me a little bit more oomph as we're training climate resilience navigators, not only to prepare for flooding events, but also how to report infrastructure stuff, how to actually, and it's part of training new organizers in the neighborhoods to build this movement for infrastructure. And so even if you start small, I guess I just want to say thank you for the encouragement to just do it. And I hope everybody is just doing the thing.
Thank you.
So can I ask a question about the tell one story, maybe something you have or have not seen successful there? There's a lot of egos just around the world, but especially in politics, and politicians who are making a lot of the decisions about where money flows, who gets access to which resources. Have you found any way to work with those egos or bring them down, or have people not need their names and symbols and all the things on something, the ownership aspect, so that it actually is community-led? Yeah.
Who wants to tackle that one?
On the issue of making sure that it is community-led, I think there's a lot of work that has to be done in terms of how we retrain our research partners, our scientific colleagues, to understand that their work is not just for their work, right? It's not just for their sake, it's really to help communities advance in the struggles that they have. And so that requires creating collaborative principles of collaboration. It requires sort of building sort of agreements that are based on both ethics and understanding of expectations of the community, and a couple of other tools that we probably don't have enough time to get into. But I do think that that's an important thing for particularly community groups who are entering into partnerships with researchers to understand and to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The one thing I would offer is a word. So again, thinking about how we frame and how we tell stories changes the outcomes. In our organization, we've stopped talking about co-benefits actually, because a co-benefit assumes that there's a main benefit. And in the world I come from, of climate and energy organizations, the main benefit is CO2, and your kid breathing easier is a nice co-benefit. And if you can start with a different word, and so the word we're using for the last few years, I'd offer up, is multi-solving. So how do we solve all these problems at the same time without having to assign a priority to them? And if you start your research with that frame, instead of co and sub benefits, I think it sets up the whole design of the project differently.
Blacksburg Richard.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to Rick Rapson's story from last night, which I found incredibly powerful. And what I found powerful about it was, what I heard and what I learned was that the community involved set the agenda, right? There was a timetable that had been imposed on them, and they said, no, we need another year. We need to start by resetting the agenda and having communities define the agenda that then drive how these solutions evolve and how the stories are told.
So can we give some love to this wonderful panel? And I just want to encourage you all over the next couple of 48 hours or 42 hours, whatever it is, to begin to talk about data. Begin to understand what data sources you all are using in your communities. Begin to talk with Richard about this Science Climate to Action Network that, again, is trying to make all this data appear distilled to a granular level where you can actually use it. Again, the brother from Front and Center, again, talked about the wonderful mapping that you're doing, but that there's still some layers that are missing. So again, we have a lot of power and resources right in this room, and I bet you if we collectively mapped all of the pieces of data that folks are working with, we'll be able to solve our own problem. But the most important thing is that you hit it too, don't let data put us in paralysis, work with what you got, move forward, and then we can only get better. So thank you all so much.